Welcome back to Compassion Over Silence. I'm Rashida Saunders. Today we're talking about the weight of being fine and what happens when functioning becomes the measure of whether we're okay. This is a space for honest conversations about leadership, healing, identity, service, and what happens when strength and humanity exist together, because carrying it all quietly comes at a cost. Have you ever been the person everyone depends on while quietly falling apart? Have people called you strong so many times that eventually you stopped telling them when you weren't okay? Maybe you've become the person everyone calls when they need advice, the person who always knows what to do, the person who keeps things together when everyone else is overwhelmed, the dependable one, the helper, the strong one. If that's you, this conversation is for you. Today's episode comes from a chapter in my memoir, Permission to Break, called The Weight of Being Fine. For a long time, I believed that if I was functioning, I must be okay. I was going to work. I was paying bills. I was raising my daughter. I was showing up for family, friends, coworkers, and my community. From the outside, my life looked fine. The problem was that fine had become a mask. Fine was my camouflage. Fine was my shield. Fine was the answer that kept everyone comfortable while slowly making me disappear. And eventually, fine became dangerous. I remember sitting across from a friend during happy hour one evening. We had finally managed to get our schedules aligned after weeks of trying. The restaurant was loud, glasses clinked, people laughed from nearby tables, music played in the background. It should have been a moment to relax. At some point, she looked at me and asked a simple question. How are you really doing? Not how's work, not how's your daughter, not how are things, how are you really doing? And without hesitation, I gave the answer I had practiced for years. I'm fine. The words came out smooth, polished, automatic. And just like that, the conversation moved on. We laughed, we talked, we shared stories. From the outside, it probably looked like two friends enjoying a night out. But inside, something in me was unraveling. My chest felt tight. My mind wouldn't slow down. I was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Looking back now, I realize I wasn't protecting myself when I said I was fine. I was protecting everyone else from the truth. My silence bought other people comfort, but it was costing me pieces of myself. And the more I said I was fine, the harder it became to admit that I wasn't. The same thing happened at work. By that point, I had spent years in law enforcement. Strength wasn't just encouraged, it was expected. You show up, you handle the call, you move on, you carry what needs to be carried. I remember sitting in roll call one morning. People were joking. Someone cracked a story. The room erupted in laughter. I laughed too. I knew how to play the part. Then a supervisor walked by, tapped me on the shoulder, and asked, "How are you holding up?" I smiled. "I'm fine." He believed me. Everybody did. Why wouldn't they? My uniform was pressed. My hair was done. I was showing up. I looked exactly like someone who had everything under control. But when roll call ended and I got into my patrol car, the performance collapsed. I sat behind the wheel staring straight ahead. The laughter from the room was gone. The silence settled in. My chest tightened. My breathing became shallow. A migraine pounded behind my eyes. And before I knew it, I was crying. Not the kind of tears you can wipe away and move on from. The kind that come from carrying too much for too long. I remember leaning forward against the steering wheel and wondering how I had gotten here. How someone who was so good at helping other people could feel so lost herself. How someone who looked so strong could feel so broken. And that's the trap. Many of us think we're okay because we're still functioning. We're still showing up, still working, still parenting, still accomplishing goals, still answering emails, still taking care of everybody else. But functioning and healing are not the same thing. For a long time, I convinced myself they were. The truth is that I was carrying years of things I had never fully processed: trauma, grief, responsibility, pressure, loss, expectations. I was carrying childhood lessons that taught me survival mattered more than emotion. I was carrying a professional culture that rewarded toughness. I was carrying the belief that needing help meant I was failing. And eventually, the weight became too much. One of the things I don't think we talk about enough is how easy it is for high functioning people to become invisible. I wasn't hiding in my house. I wasn't missing work. I wasn't withdrawing from everyone around me. In many ways, I was doing the opposite. I was showing up, I was leading, I was producing, I was accomplishing things. And because I was still functioning, people assumed I was okay. The truth is, I tried to tell people, not directly. I didn't have the language for that yet. I wasn't calling people and saying, I'm not okay. I would make comments, drop hints, mention that I was struggling, talk about being exhausted. Sometimes I would reach out hoping someone would hear what I wasn't quite saying, but most people responded the same way. You're strong. You'll get through it. You always do. And they meant it as encouragement. They weren't dismissing me. They were reminding me of who they believed I was. The problem was that strength had become the very thing keeping people from seeing how much I was hurting. I had spent years teaching people that I could handle anything. I had spent years proving that I would keep showing up no matter what. So when I finally needed support, people saw the armor and assumed I was protected by it. What they couldn't see was that the armor was getting heavier every day. That's one of the loneliest parts of being the strong one. People admire your resilience while completely missing your pain. And after a while, you start missing it too. You become so focused on surviving that you stop asking yourself what all that survival is costing you. There were nights I would drive through Portland with the music turned all the way up. I told myself I was clearing my head. The truth is, I was trying to outrun silence. I'd cross bridges with the windows cracked, letting the cold air hit my face. I'd drive through Northeast Portland, past streets that still held pieces of my childhood, past corners where I used to walk, past buildings that had changed and some that somehow looked exactly the same. I remember driving down Alberta and thinking about how much of my life had been spent surviving as a child, as a Black woman, as a police officer, as a mother, as a leader. So much of my life had been focused on becoming strong enough to handle whatever came next that I rarely stopped to ask myself a different question. Who am I when I'm not surviving? I wasn't sure I knew the answer. The city felt familiar. I didn't. I had built a life that looked successful from the outside, but somewhere along the way, I had become disconnected from myself. The music would eventually end. The drive would eventually end. And every single time, silence would be waiting for me when I got home. The hardest part of this story to tell is that there came a season in my life when I was sitting in therapy while still having thoughts about not wanting to be here. Not because I didn't love my daughter, I did. Not because I wasn't grateful, I was. Not because I didn't have people who cared about me, I did. That's what made it so confusing. I loved my daughter more than anything in the world, and I was still struggling. I had people who loved me, and I was still struggling. I had purpose, and I was still struggling. Success does not make you immune to suffering. Purpose does not make you immune to depression. Being loved does not make you immune to hopelessness. Somewhere along the way, I started believing a lie. The lie was that because I was capable, I didn't need care. Because I was strong, I didn't need support. Because I was helping other people, I should be able to help myself. I don't know exactly when I learned that lesson. Maybe it started in childhood. Maybe it came from watching the women around me carry impossible burdens without complaining. Maybe it came from growing up in a neighborhood where survival often mattered more than feelings. Maybe it came from law enforcement, where strength is respected and vulnerability is often hidden. Maybe it came from all of it. What I know is that I became incredibly good at carrying things. I carried responsibility. I carried grief. I carried other people's expectations. I carried trauma. I carried disappointment. I carried heartbreak. I carried fear. I carried stories that weren't mine to carry. And every time I successfully carried something heavy, the world rewarded me for it. People called me strong, resilient, dependable, capable. But nobody ever asked what carrying all of that was costing me. The truth is, I didn't ask either. I just kept adding weight. A little more responsibility, a little more pressure, a little more expectation, a little more pain, until eventually I couldn't tell the difference between strength and suffering. I thought exhaustion was normal. I thought hypervigilance was normal. I thought emotional numbness was normal. I thought constantly carrying the weight of everyone and everything around me was normal. I had spent so much time surviving that I no longer knew what thriving looked like. And I think a lot of people listening understand exactly what I mean. Maybe you've built a life around being dependable. Maybe people admire how much you can handle. Maybe you're the person everyone calls in a crisis. Maybe you're the one who always finds a way. But sometimes the strongest people are also the most isolated, not because nobody loves them, because nobody realizes they need support. And sometimes they don't realize it either. That's the danger of being the strong one. You become so focused on carrying the load that you forget you were never supposed to carry it alone. One night I had a plan. Even now, that is difficult to say out loud. The house was quiet, the clock ticked, the refrigerator hummed, everything looked ordinary. And somehow, that made it even more terrifying. I remember texting my daughter's father and asking if he could keep her for a few days. I told him I wasn't feeling well. What I couldn't bring myself to say was that if he picked her up, I wasn't sure I would survive the night. His response came back quickly. He couldn't, maybe in a few weeks. I remember staring at my phone, angry, heartbroken, exhausted, and then something unexpected happened. I cried. Not polite tears, not quiet tears, the kind that shake your entire body. Looking back, I think that moment mattered because it revealed something important. Part of me still wanted to live, and in the middle of that pain, I thought about my daughter. Not as some perfect movie moment where everything suddenly became clear. It wasn't like that. The pain didn't disappear. The exhaustion didn't disappear. The depression didn't disappear. But I thought about her. I thought about the little girl who trusted me to come home. I thought about school drop offs and basketball games. I thought about the bedtime conversations that felt ordinary at the time, but suddenly felt sacred. I thought about all the moments I had taken for granted because I assumed there would always be more of them. And then I thought about what she would carry if I left. Not just the grief, the story, the lesson, the inheritance. Because children are always watching, even when we think they aren't. They learn what strength looks like by watching us. They learn what love looks like by watching us. They learn what survival looks like by watching us. And I realized that if I left, she might spend the rest of her life believing that being strong meant suffering in silence, that being overwhelmed was something you hid, that asking for help was weakness, that carrying everything alone was normal. The truth is, I had inherited some of those lessons myself. Generations of people doing the best they could, generations of people surviving, generations of people carrying pain they never had the language to talk about. And sitting there that night, I realized I was standing at a crossroads. I could pass that script forward, or I could break it. I couldn't let fine become her inheritance. I couldn't let silence become her inheritance. I couldn't let survival become the only thing she learned from me. I wanted her to learn something different. I wanted her to know that strength and vulnerability can exist together, that asking for help is courageous, that healing is possible, that people don't have to earn love by suffering, that being human is not a failure. And if I'm honest, I think that realization saved my life long before I was ready to admit it. Weeks later, I finally said the words out loud in therapy. Looking back now, I don't think the hardest part was admitting I was struggling. I think the hardest part was admitting that I couldn't carry it alone, because carrying things was something I had been practicing my entire life. I grew up believing that strength meant handling things. Figure it out, keep moving, don't complain, don't be a burden, don't fall apart. And to be fair, those lessons helped me survive. They helped me navigate childhood. They helped me navigate law enforcement. They helped me navigate leadership. They helped me navigate motherhood. The problem is that the skills that help us survive one season of life can become the very things that hurt us in another. What protected me eventually started isolating me. What made me effective eventually made me lonely. The very qualities that helped me survive, self reliance, vigilance, and emotional control, were becoming barriers to the connection I desperately needed. What looked like strength from the outside was slowly becoming suffering on the inside. And because I was still functioning, no one could see it, sometimes not even me. I had become so accustomed to carrying things that I didn't know how to set them down. Even in therapy, I wanted to be the good student. I wanted to show progress. I wanted to have the right answers. I wanted to be the person who was healing correctly. And that sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, but I know I'm not the only one who has done it. Some of us are so used to performing that we perform wellness too. We perform strength, we perform resilience, we perform healing. Meanwhile, the pain is still sitting quietly in the corner waiting for us to acknowledge it. One of the greatest gifts therapy gave me was permission. Permission to stop performing. Permission to stop proving. Permission to stop earning my worth through exhaustion. Permission to be human. For so much of my life, I measured my value by what I could carry, how much responsibility I could handle, how many people I could help, how much pressure I could absorb, how much pain I could survive. But healing asked a different question, not how much can you carry, but why do you believe you have to carry it alone? That question changed everything because underneath all the achievement, all the responsibility, all the survival was a woman who was tired, not weak, not broken, tired. Tired of carrying things that were never hers to carry by herself. And for the first time, I started learning that putting something down doesn't make you weak. Sometimes it's the strongest thing you'll ever do. I almost ended it. I expected judgment. I expected shock. I expected disappointment. Instead, my therapist looked at me and simply said, "You're here, and that matters." I cannot fully explain what that moment meant. For years, I had carried everything by myself, and suddenly someone was helping me carry the truth. That was the beginning of healing, not the end, the beginning. Because healing isn't always dramatic. Sometimes healing is telling the truth after years of silence. Sometimes healing is asking for help after convincing yourself you should be able to carry it alone. Sometimes healing is allowing yourself to stop pretending you're okay when you're not. And sometimes healing begins the moment you stop performing strength and start practicing honesty. For so long, I thought strength meant never breaking. I thought survival meant holding everything together no matter the cost. I know something different now. Strength is honesty. Strength is vulnerability. Strength is asking for help before the crisis. Strength is allowing yourself to be human. When people hear stories like this, they often want to know what changed. The truth is that healing didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a single breakthrough. There wasn't one conversation that fixed everything. There wasn't one therapy session that suddenly made the pain disappear. Healing looked much smaller than that. It looked like telling the truth. First to my therapist, then to myself, eventually to people I trusted. Healing looked like learning that emotions weren't emergencies. It looked like learning that I didn't have to earn rest. It looked like realizing that my worth wasn't tied to how much I could carry. For most of my life, I believed strength meant endurance. I believed strength meant handling things on my own. I believed strength meant never needing help. Now I think strength is something different. I think strength is honesty. I think strength is vulnerability. I think strength is allowing people to see the parts of you that aren't polished and impressive. I think strength is saying, "I'm struggling," before the crisis arrives. I think strength is choosing to stay. And if you're listening to this today and you're carrying something quietly, I hope you hear this. You do not have to wait until you're drowning to ask for help. You do not have to earn compassion, and you do not have to carry everything alone. If you're listening to this today and you've become the strong one, the dependable one, the helper, the person everyone leans on, I want you to hear me. You do not have to earn rest. You do not have to prove your pain. You do not have to carry everything alone. And you do not have to keep saying you're fine when you're not. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Compassion Over Silence. Until next time, take care of yourself with the same compassion you so freely offer everyone else. And remember, compassion over silence. If this conversation resonated with you, follow the podcast, leave a review, and share it with someone who may need it. This is Compassion Over Silence. Leadership, humanity, honest conversations.